For 30 years, I worked myself to the bone, nursing colds, baking birthday cakes, scraping together college tuition with hands that never stopped shaking from exhaustion. I never asked for thanks. I never even asked for love. But the day I lost my job, the only thing my son said was, "You're not useful anymore. Get out." He had no idea that the woman he tossed out like garbage was sitting on a secret fortune large enough to buy the roof over his ungrateful head. Twice. And I planned to use every cent of it, not for revenge, but for rebirth. The rain came down in thin, silvery strands as Lorraine stood at the front door of her son's home, bags packed, umbrella trembling in her grip. The air smelled of wet concrete and betrayal. She hadn't even made it past the threshold before Jared's voice sliced through the air like a blade. "You lost your job?" he said, stepping back as if her presence might stain the tiles. "So what now? You just expect to camp out here?" Lorraine blinked. "I came to tell you I won't be working at the Beaumont estate anymore. I thought maybe I could help out around here while you and Felicia prepare for the baby." Jared's laugh was hollow, almost nervous. "Help out? You think scrubbing dishes and folding laundry is going to cover the mortgage and Felicia's maternity bills?" Behind him, Felicia emerged in her silk robe, arms folded, eyes narrowed like a dagger in designer heels. "We're already tight with expenses. If you're not contributing financially, what's your actual plan here?" Lorraine looked from one face to the other, her heart cracking in places it had once been stitched together. "I thought I'd be welcome," she said quietly. Felicia scoffed. "This isn't some retirement village. Jared told me you didn't even apply for a pension. What were you thinking?" Lorraine didn't answer. The silence swelled, thick as fog. Jared sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Mom, look. You're 61. You still have your health. You could easily pick up something else. Maybe housekeeping again, or senior care," Felicia chimed in, voice syrupy and smug. "My mother mentioned a family downtown looking for a live-in housekeeper. Private room, good pay, you'd love it." Lorraine's gaze hardened. "I didn't come here to beg for scraps." "No," Jared said, grabbing her suitcase, "but you sure act like you're entitled to stay here rent-free." He set the bag outside the door with a thud that echoed louder than thunder. And that's when it happened, the quiet click of finality. The moment Lorraine realized this wasn't just a bad mood, a tense conversation. This was exile. From the son she'd carried through sickness and debt and loneliness. The man she once held all night through fevers now saw her as disposable. "Jared," she whispered, "I gave up everything for you. My marriage, my career, my savings. I even cleaned strangers' houses for 15 years so you could go to college without debt." Jared didn't meet her eyes. Felicia did. "And we're grateful, but gratitude doesn't pay bills." Lorraine felt something calcify inside her chest. Not hatred, just the quiet, icy end of hope. "You want to talk about money?" she said, stepping back into the rain, voice low and level. "Then let me put it this way." She reached into her handbag, pulled out a small velvet pouch, and held it up. Inside, it was the key to a safe deposit box. And inside that box was a notarized document detailing her inheritance, $8.5 million in assets left to her by her late employer, Mrs. Elaine Beaumont, who had quietly regarded Lorraine not just as a housekeeper, but as the daughter she never had. But she didn't hand it over. "You've made your position clear," Lorraine said, slipping the pouch back into her bag. "So let me make mine. I'm done being useful. I'm done being used." Felicia rolled her eyes. "This is dramatic, even for you." Lorraine smiled softly. Just once. "Goodbye, Jared." He didn't stop her, not even when the rain blurred the outlines of her figure as she walked down the steps, suitcase in tow. Not even when she paused at the sidewalk, one last time, as if she might turn around. She didn't. She disappeared into the city, her dignity intact, and a secret fortune clutched close to her heart, like the final ace in a game she never wanted to play. Lorraine walked through the drizzle with no umbrella, the wheels of her suitcase dragging a soft protest against the pavement. She wasn't homeless. Not really. She had enough money to buy the entire block if she wanted. But what she needed now wasn't shelter, it was silence. Space to think. To remember. She found it in a quiet corner booth at a 24-hour diner she hadn't been to in years. The kind with cracked leather seats and coffee that smelled like burned hope. She ordered nothing but black coffee and sat staring at the rain-slick glass, watching the world go on as if her life hadn't just been peeled open like an old wound. It hadn't always been like this. There was a time when Jared's eyes lit up every time he saw her walk into the room. When he called her Mama in a breathless, trembling voice, as if she were his entire world. Lorraine had raised him on her own from the time he was a year old. Abandoned by both biological parents, found behind a grocery store dumpster, with a heart condition so fragile, she'd been told not to expect him to make it past his second birthday. She had fallen in love with him the first time she saw him in the orphanage's neonatal unit, hooked up to machines, but blinking slowly, like he could see her soul. Her then-husband had said, "We'll help him get strong. Then maybe we'll have one of our own." But when the bills piled up and the demands increased, his tune changed. "I didn't sign up for this," he'd muttered one night, slamming his plate into the sink. "This isn't even my kid." Lorraine never forgot the night he gave her the ultimatum: send Jared back to the system or raise him alone. She chose her son. The divorce was swift, brutal. She moved into a one-bedroom apartment, juggled night shifts cleaning medical offices, and worked part-time at a bakery during the day. The doctor's warnings haunted her. Jared's heart was weak. Surgery was possible, but expensive. Without it, he'd never have a normal life. So she became a machine. Sleep-deprived, underpaid, invisible. The kind of person who people thanked vaguely and forgot entirely. But she never missed a single hospital payment, never let a single prescription run dry. Years blurred into more years. At night, after tucking Jared in, she'd sit at the kitchen table sewing clothes for extra cash. She got so good that her hand-stitched dresses ended up in boutiques. She turned down every offer to scale up. There was no time, no safety net. Jared needed her too much. When Jared was 10, he finally had the major surgery. Lorraine paid every dime out of pocket. He survived, he ran, he played, he thrived, and he never remembered how close he came to dying. She never told him, not because she wanted praise, but because she wanted him to feel whole, loved, unshaken. When he got into college, Lorraine celebrated by buying a bottle of champagne she couldn't afford. Jared hugged her then, whispering, "One day, when I've made it, I'll take care of you. You'll finally get to rest." She had believed him. But college changed him. Or maybe Felicia did. Lorraine remembered the first time Jared brought her home. Felicia had smiled without warmth, her eyes scanning the old carpet, the too-small apartment. Lorraine extended a plate of roast chicken. Felicia had declined, saying she was vegan, then turned and posted a photo of lamb kebabs on her Instagram an hour later. It was subtle at first. Felicia's backhanded comments about Jared's humble beginnings, her raised brows when Lorraine talked about her housekeeping job. Her mother, a retired professor, had once asked Lorraine if she had ever considered a GED. Still, Lorraine had swallowed it all. She just wanted to be included. She wanted to be close. She even offered the down payment for their first home. Jared said he couldn't accept it. Felicia said, "Well, if it's just sitting in your savings, why not?" So Lorraine signed the check, $120,000. She didn't even ask for her name on the deed. "What's mine is yours," she told Jared. "That's what mothers do." She worked longer hours, took a second job caring for an elderly woman named Elaine Beaumont, a wealthy widow whose children had long since forgotten her. Lorraine did what she always did: cleaned, listened, helped, gave more than she had. But Elaine saw her, not as a maid, as a woman, a survivor, a friend. And after nearly 10 years of companionship, Elaine made Lorraine her sole beneficiary. No one knew, not even Lorraine herself, until the lawyer called. Elaine passed in her sleep, one hand clutched around the silver locket Lorraine had gifted her. The inheritance was shocking. $8.5 million in assets, real estate, stocks, bonds. Lorraine cried for hours, not for the money, but for the loss of the only person who had truly thanked her in decades. Still, she said nothing to Jared. Why? Because she believed in his promise. One day, I'll take care of you. She wanted to give him the chance, but that chance died the day he looked her in the eyes and called her a financial liability. Now Lorraine sat in the booth, tracing her finger over the lip of the coffee cup. The rain had stopped. Outside, the sky was clearing, but inside her, something else was forming. Not just sadness, conviction. She'd been more than a mother. She'd been a soldier, a shield, a mule, carrying the weight of generations. And now? Now she would become something new. The sunlight crept across the polished marble of the bank lobby as Lorraine sat patiently in a tailored coat she hadn't worn in years. She looked like a woman who belonged there now. Hair brushed into a neat twist, her expression calm, composed. But underneath the surface, her heart was tight with purpose. It was time. Across the table sat her late employer's attorney, Mr. Halverson, a tall, grandfatherly man with eyes like polished glass. "I've reviewed everything," he said, sliding a folder toward her. "All assets have been fully transferred. The trust is active. Liquid funds are available immediately." Lorraine's fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside, neatly organized, titles to 3 properties, investment portfolios, bonds, and the number $8,542,716. Even the decimal felt unreal. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. It wasn't just money, it was her history rewritten. Her worth, finally validated by someone who had seen her without expectation, without condition. Elaine Beaumont had never spoken of family. Only once, in passing, did she mention a daughter she hadn't heard from in years. "Children," she had said, stirring her tea slowly, "don't always come with gratitude." Lorraine had chuckled then, not realizing how deeply those words would settle inside her. For a long time, she didn't touch a cent of the inheritance. She kept living in her modest apartment, kept showing up to Elaine's estate even after the woman was gone, watering her plants, dusting the shelves as if Elaine might return and sit by the window like always. But after what Jared did, something in Lorraine shifted. It wasn't revenge she wanted. It was clarity. Jared thought she was disposable, thought she could be tossed out like an empty bottle now that her income had dried up. And he wasn't alone. Felicia, her mother, even their circle of friends. They had smirked when Lorraine brought homemade gifts to baby showers. They rolled their eyes when she spoke about work. They made sure she always felt just below the threshold of belonging. But now, she had enough to change the locks on every assumption they'd ever made about her. She began simply. First, she leased the penthouse suite of a 5-star hotel downtown. The staff were discreet, the linen soft, the silence priceless. She took her time, scheduling financial advisories, meeting with tax professionals, brushing up on legal options. Then she made the first real decision. A villa. Not for show, not for them. For herself. It was during one of the viewings that she saw her opportunity. The sales center was bustling, full of sleek professionals and eager families. Lorraine had just entered when she heard a familiar voice, a sharp, mocking tone that crawled under her skin like a memory. "Do we just let anyone walk in now?" said the woman across the showroom. Lorraine turned slowly. It was Dana, Felicia's cousin. Arrogant, poised, dressed like she belonged on a real estate billboard. The same Dana who once suggested Lorraine serve drinks instead of attending Felicia's wedding as a guest. Dana strode over, eyes narrowed. "Margaret, sorry. Lorraine, right? What are you doing here?" Lorraine tilted her head. "Looking to buy." Dana laughed, a full theatrical sound. "Oh, honey, this neighborhood has 7-figure price tags. I think the condo tours are across town." People began to glance over. The tension rippled. The room tilted. "I'm aware," Lorraine said evenly. "I've already submitted financial verification." Dana snatched the papers from the assistant's hands, flipping through them with aggressive disbelief. Then she froze. $5 million. Liquidity. Her voice faltered. This must be a mistake. But Lorraine was already reaching into her handbag, pulling out her phone. Would you like me to log in and show you my accounts in real time? The room fell quiet. Even the receptionist looked up. Ma'am, said a manager emerging from the back office, can I assist you personally? Lorraine didn't blink. Yes, but I'd like this young lady, she nodded toward the trainee who had first greeted her, to handle my sale. She was respectful, professional. Dana looked as if someone had dropped ice down the back of her dress. As Lorraine toured the model homes, people stared, not with contempt, but with curiosity. She walked with poise, listening, asking sharp questions about zoning, resale value, HOA fees. By the end of the hour, she'd signed for one villa outright. Would you like to schedule a follow-up? The assistant asked, her voice shaking with excitement. No need, Lorraine said with a calm smile. I'll be buying another. As an investment, Dana stood near the espresso bar, still frozen in disbelief. Lorraine approached her on the way out, leaned in slightly, and said in a voice just loud enough for the room to hear, Next time someone walks in dressed simply, don't assume they're poor. Some of us wear humility better than handbags. Then she walked away, her name already on 2 deeds. But she wasn't finished yet. Back at the hotel, she opened a new file. Estate recovery, Brighton Lane. The home she paid for, the one Jared and Felicia were living in. It was time to reclaim what had been stolen. The first letter she sent was polite, courteous even. A simple envelope addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Jared Knowles, with a printed logo at the top, Law Offices of Halverson and Lee. Inside was a single-page notice informing them that an investigation into the ownership of their property at Brighton Lane had begun. No accusations, no threats. Just the first pebble dropped into a still pond. Lorraine didn't tell anyone she was behind it. She just waited. It didn't take long. The phone rang exactly 3 days later. She stared at Jared's name flashing on the screen and let it ring. Then again. Then again. By the 4th missed call, he left a voicemail, his voice pinched and too cheerful. Hey, Mom. I think there's been some weird mistake. We got this letter about the house. I assume it's nothing, probably some bank confusion. But yeah, if you get a chance, could you call me? No rush. No rush. Lorraine smiled grimly and placed her phone face down. The next call came from Felicia. This time, the tone had shifted. I don't know what game you're playing, she snapped the moment voicemail picked up, but we're not scared. This house is legally ours. You gave it to Jared. You signed it over. So whatever fantasy you've cooked up in that hotel you're living in, you can stop now. Fantasy? Lorraine leaned back in her chair, letting that word hang in the air. She hadn't seen fantasy since the day she buried her dreams to clean bathrooms for other people's children. That night, she sat on the balcony of her hotel room sipping tea while downtown lights blinked like confetti. She remembered the exact moment she handed Jared that first down payment, how proud he had looked, how Felicia had kissed her cheek with her fake, camera-ready smile. She remembered how they'd laughed when she offered to babysit their future kids. You? Full-time? That's sweet, but we're looking for professional help, Felicia had said. Lorraine had smiled then, too, but it didn't reach her eyes. By the following week, the letters escalated. Not threats, warnings. The law firm requested documentation surrounding the financial source of the Brighton Lane home. A forensic accountant began auditing the original wire transfers. The paper trail was clear. Every cent came from Lorraine, from an account under her name, from labor logged under her tax ID. She had every receipt. Felicia responded by calling her hotel at 7:30 in the morning, demanding to be put through. Lorraine answered with calm indifference. You're trying to destroy us, Felicia seethed. What happened to being a mother? You raised him. How can you now act like a stranger? Lorraine's voice was ice-wrapped in velvet. A stranger, she said. That's funny, because that's exactly how you treated me the moment I stopped being financially convenient. Felicia stammered. Jared's heartbroken. He cries every night. He's ashamed. He should be, Lorraine said and hung up. By the end of the month, Jared showed up at the hotel in person. He waited in the lobby like a child after detention. When Lorraine stepped out of the elevator, he rushed over, disheveled and breathless. "Mom, please," he said. "Let's talk, just 5 minutes." She paused, staring at the face she had once cradled with fevered worry. The boy who once clung to her in doctors' offices. The boy she had nearly bankrupted herself to save. But that boy was gone. In his place stood a man who had thrown her away the minute she lost her usefulness. "I'm busy," she said. "My legal team can answer your questions." His face fell. "Why are you doing this?" She looked at him, truly looked at him. "Because you already did," she said, and walked past him without another word. The collapse came slowly, like the way ice fractures before it breaks. Felicia's parents pulled their investment from Jared's startup. Her mother gave a tearful speech at the faculty gala, subtly blaming Lorraine's destructive greed for destabilizing their family. Jared's best friend stopped returning calls. He had heard about the eviction attempt, and it didn't sit right. Whispers started to circulate. At church, at the tennis club, at the school where Felicia volunteered. And then came the turning point. An anonymous email, Lorraine's doing, landed in the inboxes of a few carefully selected board members on Felicia's nonprofit committee. Attached were photos, time-stamped emails, and transaction records showing how Felicia had used part of Lorraine's gift as collateral for an investment fund without disclosure. She wasn't fired, but she was benched, indefinitely. When the news finally reached Lorraine's ears, via a discreet text from her lawyer, she felt no triumph, just balance. The scales, long tipped against her, were finally beginning to right themselves. And she wasn't finished. She had one more card to play. She called her lawyer and gave the go-ahead to formally challenge the title deed on the Brighton Lane house. With documented evidence of coercion, unpaid promissory notes, and proof the home had been acquired under false assurances of joint ownership, they had a strong case. But Lorraine didn't want just the house. She wanted history rewritten. No more silent suffering. No more shame wrapped in motherly duty. She would make the world see what betrayal cost, and what dignity could become when it stood up on its own 2 feet. And she would do it, not with screaming or threats, but with paper, precision, and time. Because in the end, justice doesn't need to yell. It just needs to be patient. Before Lorraine became the kind of woman who bought villas in cash and silenced her enemies with legal summonses, she was a girl with calloused hands and second-hand dreams. She was 17 when she learned to stretch a meal for 3 days, 22 when she first scrubbed blood from hospital floors during the graveyard shift, 30 when she chose a boy with a broken heart over a husband with a hollow one. Her life had never been built on ease. It was built on patches, repairs, things held together by grit and faith. And silence. So much silence. In the days following the legal offensive against Jared and Felicia, Lorraine began revisiting old files. Not the financial kind, the real kind. Her life, her labor, her losses. She dusted off boxes stored at the back of a rented locker, school projects from Jared's elementary years, his hospital discharge summaries, even notes from child psychologists when he first began acting out in middle school. He had always struggled with identity. He had always felt misplaced. Lorraine remembered the night he came home crying because a classmate teased him about not looking like his mother. She'd wrapped him in a blanket, sat him on her lap even though he was already too tall, and whispered, "You are mine. Always." But she never told him the truth, that he had been left in a dumpster, that he came into her life through tragedy and choice, not blood. She thought protecting him from that pain would give him a cleaner life. She was wrong. It didn't make him stronger. It made him fragile, and it made her invisible. Everything she did, from sewing his Halloween costumes by hand to walking to work in January because the car needed repairs, was meant to build a wall between him and the kind of childhood she had endured. And still, somewhere along the way, she disappeared in the story. At 43, she suffered a stress-induced collapse in a Walmart parking lot. She didn't tell Jared. He had exams that week. Instead, She asked a coworker to take her home and made soup with trembling hands while her vision still blurred. At 48, she pawned her wedding ring to help cover Jared's rent after his first job laid him off. At 55, she declined surgery on her left knee because the deductible was too high, and Felicia's baby was on the way. "We'll need you to help with the infant," they had said. "Daycare costs are murder." She had nodded, grateful to be needed. That was her greatest lie. She wasn't grateful. She was afraid. Afraid that if she ever stopped being useful, they'd forget she existed. And in the end, she was right. But now, with the inheritance no longer hidden and her hands no longer bound by guilt, she began a quiet audit, not just of her finances, but of her soul. She made a list, line by line, of every dollar spent on Jared from the time he came into her life. Adoption fees, $3,400. Pediatric cardiac surgeries, $96,700. Special education tutoring, $12,800. Private high school scholarship gap, $8,000. College tuition, 4 years, $184,000. Apartment rent subsidies post-graduation, $42,000. Home down payment, $120,000. Total, $466,900. That didn't even count groceries, holidays, or the 1,000 invisible acts of devotion no spreadsheet could ever capture. And what had she received in return? Silence, criticism, exile. But Lorraine didn't cry as she calculated. She didn't rage. She just got even clearer. The pain didn't scare her anymore. She began journaling, daily, by the window of her new villa, not to wallow, but to witness, to chronicle the years that had gone unspoken, the sacrifices no one applauded, the loneliness dressed in apron strings. Each entry began the same way. "Today I reclaim." One day it was her name, another her time, another her right to choose joy over obligation. She hired a private piano teacher and began lessons every Tuesday morning. She joined a painting class and took a trip to the coast alone. She reconnected with her old friend Tamika, the only woman who had seen her cry after Jared's wedding, when she realized her name wasn't even mentioned in the groom's speech. "You gave them everything," Tamika had said, "and they wrote you out of your own story. Not anymore." By the end of that month, Lorraine had created a memory wall in her home. Photos of her younger self, working, smiling, surviving. Photos of Jared as a boy, untouched by greed or resentment. And in the center, a framed copy of Elaine Beaumont's final letter to her. It read, "Lorraine, if you're reading this, it means I am no longer there to tell you what I should have said years ago. You are the most decent, dignified, resilient woman I've ever met. You served not because you had to, but because you believed in love. You gave more than anyone ever deserved. And now, it's your turn to receive. I've left you everything, because you were everything. Don't give it away. Don't shrink. Don't apologize. Live, fully, loudly, freely. Love, Elaine." Lorraine read that letter every Sunday, not because she needed the money, but because it reminded her that the historical cost of her love, her labor, her silence, it was real. And finally, it was being paid. It was a Wednesday morning when Jared showed up again, this time not at her hotel or the villa, but at the piano studio where Lorraine had just finished her lesson. She was still tucking her sheet music into a leather folder when the door creaked open and he stepped in, hair uncombed, shirt wrinkled. "Mom," he said softly. Lorraine didn't flinch. "You shouldn't be here." He looked around, confused by the smell of polished wood and the soft hum of classical music from the next room. "I didn't know where else to find you. You're not answering my calls." She finished organizing her things before replying, her voice cool and clipped. "That's intentional." "Can we talk? Just for a minute?" he asked, that old, broken boy look seeping into his face like a trick he didn't even know he was playing anymore. Lorraine hesitated, then gestured toward the hallway. Not to invite him in, just to get him out of the quiet sanctity of her lesson space. Outside, the sky was overcast, and the breeze tugged at the ends of her coat. Jared stuffed his hands into his pockets and walked beside her like a child in trouble. I didn't come to fight, he said. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Things got heated. Felicia's been under pressure, and I wasn't thinking clearly. Lorraine kept walking. So you're here to blame stress. He winced. Yes, but also no. Look, Mom, what happened was ugly, okay? But it's not like we don't love you. Felicia and I were just scared. Money's been tight. The pregnancy stuff didn't work out. She's been a mess. Lorraine stopped walking. What do you want, Jared? She asked flatly. He shuffled. I thought maybe we could hit reset, start over. Lorraine laughed, a dry, bitter sound that startled even herself. Reset? Jared? This isn't a Netflix show. There is no skip intro on the 30 years I gave you. He opened his mouth to respond, but she held up a hand. You want honesty? Here it is. I'm not coming back. I'm not paying your mortgage. I'm not helping with any baby that may or may not come. I'm not a wallet. I'm not a doormat. And I'm certainly not a retirement plan. I never said you were, he began. You never had to, she cut in. Every action, every word, every look made that clear. The wind picked up. Jared looked smaller than she remembered, like his body couldn't quite carry the weight of his consequences. Felicia said if you really loved us, you wouldn't let us drown. Lorraine turned to face him fully, her expression blank but blazing. I've been drowning for 30 years, Jared. You just never noticed because I smiled through it. He swallowed hard. Then at least, let's talk about the house, he said finally. There's got to be a way to work this out. And there it was, the real reason he came. Not love, not guilt, just logistics. Lorraine narrowed her eyes. You mean the house I paid for? The one with my name nowhere on the deed. The one you locked me out of and laughed about with your wife. That's not fair, he said weakly. She stepped closer. No, Jared. What's not fair is raising a child from infancy, giving up your own blood family, your marriage, your career, and being told you're not useful the minute the checks stop coming. He looked like he might cry. I'm still your son. Lorraine's face didn't change. And I was your mother, until you chose money over me. He stared at her, mouth open, eyes wide, as if he were seeing her for the first time. Wait, was? He whispered. I'm not doing this anymore, she said firmly. I'm not playing house. I'm not playing mom to a man who only remembers my existence when he wants something. So you're cutting me off? He asked, his voice sharp now, trembling with indignation. Forever? Yes. You're serious? He said, voice rising. You're just going to walk away? You're going to abandon me after everything? Lorraine stepped back. Don't you dare use that word. He froze. Abandonment is leaving a baby in a dumpster, she continued quietly. Not finally learning to protect yourself from emotional leeches. Jared's eyes widened. How do you know about that? The silence between them twisted. Lorraine met his gaze with eerie calm. Because I was the one who found you. Because I chose you when no one else did. And because for 30 years I never once threw your origin in your face. Jared stood there, as if the wind had knocked something out of him. Why now? He whispered. Why are you saying this now? She gave him the simplest, truest answer. Because I needed you to understand that I gave you everything, and I owe you nothing more. He blinked back tears, but she was done mothering his wounds. She reached into her purse, pulled out a sleek white envelope, and handed it to him. He took it cautiously, eyes scanning the bold letterhead. Superior Court, petition for ownership review, property title contested. What is this? He whispered, panicked. The next step, she said, in making sure what's mine comes back to me. He looked up at her, speechless, and she walked away. No tears, no guilt, only the sound of her heels clicking against the pavement like a final verdict in a trial that had gone on too long. By early spring, the tides had turned, quietly, methodically, and with devastating precision. Lorraine didn't send another message to Jared or Felicia. She didn't need to. The legal machinery she had set in motion weeks ago had begun to rumble forward like a freight train. At first, it was background noise, minor requests from her attorney, questions from the city's property registrar. But then, cracks appeared. The mortgage lender began requesting additional documentation, confused about how the down payment had been sourced. Lorraine's lawyer provided a meticulous packet: emails, bank transfers, signed promissory notes Jared never honored, receipts Felicia thought would never resurface, and that was only the beginning. By the time Lorraine finalized her second villa purchase, a sleek, sunlit home in the city's arts district, whispers about the Knowles scandal were already bubbling among the higher social circles. The couple that had once waltzed through galas and networking brunches were suddenly radioactive. Felicia's phone went silent. Donors pulled out of her nonprofit. Her position on a university advisory board was suspended pending review. An old tweet resurfaced, something flippant she'd posted years ago about entitled parents. The irony wasn't lost on the public. Meanwhile, Jared lost his co-founder. His tech startup had been operating on a skeleton crew since January. But when his business partner saw the lawsuit, the unraveling image, and the growing headlines, he cut ties fast, releasing a public statement about misaligned values and internal conflict. They were sinking, and no lifeboats were coming. Lorraine, on the other hand, flourished in silence. She never gloated, never posted, never taunted. Instead, she surrounded herself with soft things: fresh flowers on the dining table, jazz records playing low in the background, cinnamon rolls baking in her oven just because she felt like it. Her world became smaller, safer, sacred. She reconnected with art. Every Saturday, she painted under a wide oak tree in her backyard, the kind of morning stillness she'd only ever glimpsed in other people's lives, now settling around her like sunlight on skin. One morning, while sketching, her new neighbor stopped by, a gentle woman in her 70s named Esther, who walked slowly with a cane and spoke like every word had a story attached. "You're the one who bought the blue roof villa, aren't you?" Esther asked, with a curious glint in her eye. "I am," Lorraine said. "You're also the woman in that article," Esther continued, not unkindly. "The one with the son who—" Lorraine didn't flinch. "Yes," she replied. Esther nodded solemnly. "Good for you." That was all she said, but it landed like a benediction. Back downtown, the legal proceedings advanced. Jared, desperate to halt the growing storm, filed a motion to delay the ownership dispute. Denied. He tried to countersue for emotional distress. Denied. Every attempt was shredded by Lorraine's legal team, armed with documentation, case law, and a clear narrative, a vulnerable woman exploited by those she trusted most. And then, one afternoon, the final blow came. Lorraine's attorney called her, calm but energized. "It's over," he said. "The court ruled in your favor." She sat on the patio, the spring breeze curling around her. "The house? Will be yours again within 60 days. Jared and Felicia must vacate. There's nothing left for them to contest." Lorraine didn't smile. She closed her eyes, breathing in the quiet. She had always imagined this moment would feel like triumph, like justice arriving on a white horse. But it didn't. It felt like release. She called her lawyer and gave the go-ahead to formally challenge the title deed on the Brighton Lane house. With documented evidence of coercion, unpaid promissory notes, and proof the home had been acquired under false assurances of joint ownership, they had a strong case. But Lorraine didn't want just the house. She wanted history rewritten. No more silent suffering. No more shame wrapped in motherly duty. She would make the world see what betrayal cost, and what dignity could become when it stood up on its own 2 feet. And she would do it, not with screaming or threats, but with paper, precision, and time. Because in the end, justice doesn't need to yell. It just needs to be patient. Before Lorraine became the kind of woman who bought villas in cash and silenced her enemies with legal summonses, she was a girl with calloused hands and second-hand dreams. She was 17 when she learned to stretch a meal for 3 days, 22 when she first scrubbed blood from hospital floors during the graveyard shift, 30 when she chose a boy with a broken heart over a husband with a hollow one. Her life had never been built on ease. It was built on patches, repairs, things held together by grit and faith. And silence. So much silence. In the days following the legal offensive against Jared and Felicia, Lorraine began revisiting old files. Not the financial kind, the real kind. Her life, her labor, her losses. She dusted off boxes stored at the back of a rented locker, school projects from Jared's elementary years, his hospital discharge summaries, even notes from child psychologists when he first began acting out in middle school. He had always struggled with identity. He had always felt misplaced. Lorraine remembered the night he came home crying because a classmate teased him about not looking like his mother. She'd wrapped him in a blanket, sat him on her lap even though he was already too tall, and whispered, "You are mine. Always." But she never told him the truth, that he had been left in a dumpster, that he came into her life through tragedy and choice, not blood. She thought protecting him from that pain would give him a cleaner life. She was wrong. It didn't make him stronger. It made him fragile, and it made her invisible. Everything she did, from sewing his Halloween costumes by hand to walking to work in January because the car needed repairs, was meant to build a wall between him and the kind of childhood she had endured. And still, somewhere along the way, she disappeared in the story. At 43, she suffered a stress-induced collapse in a Walmart parking lot. She didn't tell Jared. He had exams that week. Instead, she asked a coworker to take her home and made soup with trembling hands while her vision still blurred. At 48, she pawned her wedding ring to help cover Jared's rent after his first job laid him off. At 55, she declined surgery on her left knee because the deductible was too high, and Felicia's baby was on the way. "We'll need you to help with the infant," they had said. "Daycare costs are murder." She had nodded, grateful to be needed. That was her greatest lie. She wasn't grateful. She was afraid. Afraid that if she ever stopped being useful, they'd forget she existed. And in the end, she was right. But now, with the inheritance no longer hidden and her hands no longer bound by guilt, she began a quiet audit, not just of her finances, but of her soul. She made a list, line by line, of every dollar spent on Jared from the time he came into her life. Adoption fees, $3,400. Pediatric cardiac surgeries, $96,700. Special education tutoring, $12,800. Private high school scholarship gap, $8,000. College tuition, 4 years, $184,000. Apartment rent subsidies post-graduation, $42,000. Home down payment, $120,000. Total, $466,900. That didn't even count groceries, holidays, or the 1,000 invisible acts of devotion no spreadsheet could ever capture. And what had she received in return? Silence, criticism, exile. But Lorraine didn't cry as she calculated. She didn't rage. She just got even clearer. The pain didn't scare her anymore. She began journaling, daily by the window of her new villa, not to wallow, but to witness, to chronicle the years that had gone unspoken, the sacrifices no one applauded, the loneliness dressed in apron strings. Each entry began the same way. Today I reclaim. One day it was her name, another her time, another her right to choose joy over obligation. She hired a private piano teacher and began lessons every Tuesday morning. She joined a painting class and took a trip to the coast alone. She reconnected with her old friend Tamika, the only woman who had seen her cry after Jared's wedding, when she realized her name wasn't even mentioned in the groom's speech. "You gave them everything," Tamika had said, "and they wrote you out of your own story. Not anymore." Like the unhooking of a weight she hadn't known she was still carrying. The next morning, a moving company appeared at Brighton Lane. Lorraine didn't go. She didn't need to witness their downfall. It was already written in court filings and padded envelopes. She simply waited for the call confirming the keys were back in her hands. When it came, she walked into the house alone. Same walls, same kitchen, same creaky floorboard in the hallway, but everything felt different. This time, it was hers, without strings, without guilt, without obligation. She stood in the living room for a long while, watching the light spill across the floors like a memory untangled. That night, as she curled up on the sofa with a cup of tea, her phone buzzed. A message, unfamiliar number. I know you won't respond. I don't blame you. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. Jay. Lorraine stared at the screen. She didn't delete the message. She didn't reply. She simply turned her phone off and placed it face down. Some storms didn't need thunder to do their damage, and some victories didn't require applause to be complete. Lorraine woke with sunlight pouring across her bed, not from an alarm or someone else's demands, but simply because the day had arrived. No obligations, no appointments, just space, just breathe. The first thing she did was take a walk. No makeup, no phone. Just her steps and the symphony of birdsong threading through the neighborhood trees. She walked until her lungs filled with the scent of lilacs and clean earth, until she remembered what it felt like to exist for no one else. When she returned home, the kettle whistled. She poured herself a cup of dark roast and sat on the back deck of her villa, the one no one else had touched, claimed, or tainted. She opened her sketchbook and painted the shadows dancing through her garden. No deadlines, no critics, just color. A week later, Monica, the soft-spoken trainee from the real estate office, texted her, "Hi, Lorraine. Just checking in. Hope you're loving the new place." Lorraine smiled. Monica had been kind, respectful, the only one in that entire building who hadn't looked through her. She texted back, "It's paradise. Would love to take you to lunch. My treat." They met at a quiet rooftop cafe overlooking the river. Monica wore her hair down this time, more confident, a new glimmer in her voice. "I got promoted," she said, eyes shining. "Junior sales executive. 2 closings last month, all thanks to you." Lorraine reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "No, Monica, that was you. I just helped the world see it." They talked for hours, about beginnings, about belief, about how some people see worth only in titles while others see it in effort. Lorraine told her bits and pieces of her story, careful with details but honest in emotion. Monica listened, eyes glossy. "You should tell the whole thing one day," she said. "I think a lot of people would learn from it." Lorraine didn't answer, but something inside her stirred. Later that month, she joined a local writing group at the public library. Just a dozen strangers on folding chairs with notebooks and brave hearts. Their stories were raw, some tragic, some hilarious, all real. When it was Lorraine's turn to read, she shared a piece titled "Inheritance Isn't Always Money." The room went still. One woman wept. Another clapped before anyone else did. Afterwards, the moderator approached her. "Have you ever thought about publishing?" Lorraine shook her head. "Not really." "Well," the woman said, "maybe it's time." Lorraine walked home that night with her manuscript pages clutched tight, like something sacred, something new, something hers. Her days took shape slowly, lovingly. Mondays were for piano, Chopin in the morning, Debussy by night. She'd never play at Carnegie, but that wasn't the point. Her fingers danced not for others, but for herself. Tuesdays were for cooking, roasted butternut squash, garlic rosemary bread, tiny lemon tarts that melted joyfully on the tongue. Wednesdays for painting, Thursdays for reading, Fridays for silence. She let her hair go gray, proudly. She stopped covering the scar on her hand from when Jared was 7, and she burned herself trying to make him birthday pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. She let herself remember who she was before motherhood, before sacrifice, before silence. And she liked the woman she rediscovered. Then one Sunday afternoon, as she rearranged the potted violets on her windowsill, a car pulled into the driveway. Not a Lexus or a BMW, an old cherry-red Beetle. The door opened. Out stepped someone Lorraine hadn't seen in over 20 years. Richard, her ex-husband, gray at the temples now, a bit thicker around the middle, but unmistakable. He stood at the edge of the walkway holding a small box. "I'm not here to stay," he said. "Just came to return this." He handed her the box. Inside was a tiny wool cardigan, the one she had knitted for Jared as a toddler, mustard yellow with lopsided buttons. "I found it in the attic. Thought maybe you'd want it." She stared at it, then back at him. "Why now?" she asked softly. Richard shrugged. "I saw the articles. Figured you could use a piece of the past that wasn't painful." Lorraine nodded slowly. "Thank you." They stood in silence for a long moment. Then she said, "You know, I don't regret choosing Jared, even after all of it." Richard looked at her. "Neither do I. I just didn't have the guts to stay." They said goodbye without promises, but Lorraine kept the cardigan, not because she missed who Jared became, but because she still cherished the boy she had once saved. That night, she opened a fresh page in her journal and wrote, "Today, I reclaim peace. Not the kind that comes from being left alone, but the kind you earn after surviving what should have broken you." And just before she turned out the light, she whispered the words she hadn't dared say in decades. "I forgive myself." Lorraine was halfway through an oil painting, wisteria climbing a weathered stone wall, when her phone buzzed on the patio table. It was the concierge from her villa complex. "Ms. Bennett," the voice said, low and careful. "There's someone asking to see you. He says he's your son." Lorraine set her brush down. Her first instinct was to refuse. Flat, cold. But something in the wind that morning had felt different, less like tension, more like unfinished chords. "Send him to the garden entrance," she said. She had no interest in letting Jared through the front door of her home. But she would hear whatever this final act might be. 10 minutes later, she watched him walk the winding garden path, slower than usual, thinner than she remembered. Not broken, but dented, the way a once shiny thing loses its edge after too many falls. He paused when he saw her, still holding the brush, the canvas mid-bloom behind her. "Hi, Mom," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You're using that word again." He swallowed. "I guess I never stopped." Lorraine gestured to a nearby bench. "Say whatever you came to say." He sat, hands knotted together. "I'm not here to ask for money, not even forgiveness. I just wanted to tell you I left Felicia." Lorraine didn't respond. The birds did. 2 of them took flight from the hedge, leaving behind only silence. "She served me divorce papers a month after the ruling, said she couldn't respect a man who couldn't hold his family together." "And yet," Lorraine said, "she had no issue helping you tear it apart." He looked down. "Yeah." More silence. Finally, he said, "I moved out of the city. I live in a studio above a print shop now. The owner lets me stay cheap if I help with inventory." Lorraine tilted her head. "Is this a confession or a pity pitch?" "Neither," Jared said. "Just a report, in case you were curious." She wasn't. Not really, but she let him speak. "I started therapy," he said. "Told the whole story. About the adoption, about you, about the inheritance. My therapist said I have a warped view of gratitude, that I tie love to leverage." "You think?" Lorraine said dryly. He almost smiled, but it didn't last. He asked me something that I couldn't answer. He said, "What did you expect her to do? Thank you for using her." And I had no answer. Lorraine stood and walked to a lavender bush, snipped 2 stems, and returned. "I came here to give you these," he said suddenly, reaching into his coat. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn, creased, weathered. It was a drawing, a stick figure version of himself as a child, standing next to a woman labeled, "My Mom." Above them, a son with a happy face and a note. "When I grow up, I'll buy you a castle so you can rest forever." "I found it in an old box," he said. "Thought you might remember it." Lorraine took it, looked at it, held it for a long time. "I remember," she said. "You cried when your crayon snapped while drawing the sun." I taped it back together. Jared nodded. You always fix things. Lorraine exhaled slowly. Until I stopped. She stood, still holding the drawing. I'm glad you're in therapy. I hope you get what you need. But Jared, there is no castle. There is no going back. I know, he said. I'm sorry. Lorraine didn't cry. She simply nodded once. That's a start. He stood too, awkward in the space. Do you think someday we might? She shook her head gently. No. His mouth opened, then closed again. He wasn't surprised, just punctured. I see, he said quietly. She walked him back to the gate, opened it, and stood aside. Before leaving, he turned and asked, Do you still think adopting me was the right choice? She stared at him for a long moment. Her voice, when it came, was like still water, unshaken, honest. I think you were the right child for me to save, but not the right one to stay. He nodded once, then walked away. Lorraine returned to her painting. The wisteria hadn't changed. The light still hit the canvas just right. The world, despite it all, kept blooming. The morning was crisp and quiet. Lorraine stood barefoot in her kitchen, the cool tile grounding her as she poured hot water over a bag of jasmine tea. Outside, the lake shimmered, catching the first blush of dawn. Birds danced from branch to branch in the maple tree she'd planted just last fall. It had been 3 months since Jared's visit. Since then, he hadn't returned. He hadn't called. There were no flowers, no letters, just the absence of noise. The long, merciful silence that comes after a storm has finally exhausted itself. Lorraine welcomed it like an old friend. She no longer thought of Jared with bitterness. The ache had dulled into something quieter, more observational. He was no longer her burden to carry. He had stepped off her path, and she had chosen not to follow. The house on Brighton Lane? Sold. At a premium, too, right as the market peaked again. The profits had gone not into splurges or trophies, but into something simpler, a scholarship fund. The Elaine Bennett Trust, named for the woman who first believed in her value, now quietly sponsored the education of young women aging out of foster care. Girls like she once was, resourceful, unclaimed, underestimated. Lorraine didn't attend the press announcement. She didn't pose for photos. Her name was printed in the byline, not the headline. She didn't need credit. She had peace. Later that afternoon, as she clipped roses in her backyard, she received a call from Tamika, her oldest friend, her mirror. I ran into someone at the co-op, Tamika said. Said you're some kind of folk legend around town now. Lorraine chuckled. Legend's a strong word. Well, you earned it, Tamika replied. A single mom who raised a son that wasn't hers, survived betrayal, came out the other side with grace and assets. Sounds mythical to me. Lorraine shook her head with a smile. It sounds like a long story people only appreciate once it's over. Then maybe it's time you write it, Tamika said softly. The real version. That night, Lorraine opened her laptop. The blinking cursor waited like a patient companion. She began not with Jared, not with Elaine, but with herself. I was never born to be quiet. I simply forgot how loud I was allowed to be. Weeks passed, then seasons. The hair at her temples turned a dignified silver. Her joints ached a little more in the mornings. But her spirit? It felt younger than ever. She took a solo trip to Santa Fe, painted desert skylines, ate green chili stew from a food truck run by an old woman with tattoos and a flute in her apron pocket. They talked for hours. She laughed more, ate slowly, danced barefoot on her porch when it rained. No one asked her for money, no one demanded her time, and she didn't miss the noise. One quiet Saturday, she passed by an old community center and noticed a flyer. Memoir Writing Group, Saturdays at 10, all stories welcome. She walked in. A few months later, her draft manuscript sat in the hands of a small publisher. The editor's note read, "This isn't just a memoir, it's a reckoning, a survival anthem for women taught to disappear. Let's make it sing." One evening, as she stirred lentil stew, a letter arrived, handwritten, unfamiliar. She opened it carefully. Dear Lorraine, I know I don't deserve to ask you anything, and I won't. I just wanted to say, thank you for loving me when you didn't have to. You saved me. I hope, wherever life takes me, that I can become someone worth saving. Jared. She read it twice, then folded it neatly and slid it into a drawer, not to treasure, but to archive. A footnote. A past now properly shelved. That spring, the roses bloomed twice as large. Her second book was in the works, a fictionalized story this time, inspired by a woman who carried everyone else's pain until she finally remembered to carry her own. She titled it, Inheritance Isn't Always Money. On the dedication page, she wrote, For anyone who gave too much and stayed too long, you're allowed to walk away, you're allowed to begin again, you're allowed to belong to yourself. And when the book launched, she did something she never imagined. She smiled into the camera at her own signing table, surrounded by readers who saw her not as a cautionary tale, but as a symbol of what survival could look like in full bloom. The best thing I ever did wasn't saving someone else. It was finally saving myself.